I'm Madylin Hernandez from Oklahoma State University, and I'm talking to Stacy Takacs. Is that how you say that?
Takacs.
Takacs. I'm talking to Stacy Takacs, and today is March 3rd, 2021, and we're going to be discussing Stacy and her time related to Oklahoma Humanities. Do you want to start off by telling me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a professor of American Studies at Oklahoma State University. I have received numerous OH grants in addition to serving on the board, so I'm doing some other things. So hopefully we can talk about those things. My areas of expertise are television history and war and militarism. And I'm working on a book about the American Forces Network right now, which OH helped fund some of the research for.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about do you want to discuss how you got involved with Oklahoma Humanities?
Well, I think I was recommended by a colleague of mine who had been on the board a couple of years previous. I came on the board 2005 through 2010, I think. And one of my colleagues had been on the board a few years previous to that. And he saw the call for, I don't know, or he heard about that they were looking for new board members, and he suggested my name, and I agreed to do it, and the rest is history.
While serving on the board, what specifically did you do?
Well, I was on the executive committee here. Mostly I just did sort of general board work. So, we would have regular meetings and I would attend those, and we would review grant applications and talk about those and make decisions based on our review. Went to programs that were put on, provided input in the construction of some of those programs, that sort of thing. Things you do at a regular board meeting.
Okay, perfect. I'm trying to think what direction we should go. Do you want to talk about how Oklahoma Humanities has impacted your specific projects in your career?
Yeah, that would be great. I've had 3 OH grants, one to bring in a speaker at Oklahoma State. We brought in Robin Oakes a couple of years ago with the help of a program grant. And I've had 2 scholar grants that have helped fund research for projects that have gone to publication. I can pull them up for you if you want a video of it. I actually kind of prepped for that. So let me see if I can find these things. Yeah, so the first, excuse me. Yeah. The first grant I got was to go to the Madison, Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin Center for Film, Theater, and Radio Research. I can't remember what they call their archive there, but I was given a grant to go and do some research on these old military programs, West Point Story and Men of Annapolis, which the grant was in 2005. So before I went onto the board, and that eventually became a publication for the Journal of Popular Culture Studies. Unfortunately, I don't have a cover of this, and the thing is pretty boring. Can I share my screen with you? There it is. All right.
Will you move your microphone? It's like making a weird.
Is it? Let me just take these off. Let's see if that's better. Can you hear this?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the publication that came from that research grant. Then in 2010, I got another research grant to go to the Texas Tech Vietnam Archive, where I did some research for the current book project. Actually, I may have had 3 of these. I feel like I had one recently too, to go to the Library of Congress. Yeah, that's right. I had 3 of these. Yeah, so the Library of Congress one actually became a publication for Let me stop that share and start another one. This is weird that it does it this way. But the grant from that actually became part of a publication that I did for the the Oklahoma Humanities magazine that Carla Walker edits. So it became some of the research for this article, Educating the Troops, Shaping Consensus with Democratic Propaganda. So this came out in the fall last year in conjunction with the election. And
so very recent, you've worked with Oklahoma Humanities.
Yeah. So I sort of about every 5 years I have a research grant, and each of them have resulted in publications. Some of them in public forums like OH Magazine, some of them in academic forums like the Journal of Popular Culture Studies, or the Rutledge. I had a book on American militarism published by Rutledge that some of the grant money also helped fund. So
that's awesome. This is kind of off topic, but do you teach at the Stillwater campus?
I do both, actually. So my home campus is Tulsa, but I teach once a year over in Stillwater, and I'm doing that this semester.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Is there like anything specific you want to discuss in our interview today about?
About my
I
time.
just wanted to make sure.
I mean, what I would say is that the time that I was served on the board, I mean, the people involved were just exceptional people, from the regular staff, who were the most competent people I think I've ever met. David Pettyjohn was there as program director at the time, and he is just a whirlwind, just amazing. Yeah, and Carla, I can't say enough about Carla Walker's work. She does such great work with the magazine. It's just a lovely publication, and she's a wonderful editor. Yeah, so the board members were a variety of people, from people in the business community to academics to just citizens who got drafted. And just really lovely people to work with. I think everyone pulled in the same direction most of the time, even though came from very different experiences, and everyone really was invested in the mission of the unit.
Have you been involved in any of their like outreach programs?
I have participated in a couple, really in only, I did a, remind me what the book program is called. Do you have that notes on that?
I do not.
I can't remember what it's called. That's bad. But they had this book program, and one of the locations, mostly they run these programs. It's sort of reading discussion program, like a book club, but with a scholar involved. And they run them out of the libraries. And I participated in one that wasn't out of a library. It was through the, now I can't remember the name of that organization. The organization in Tulsa that helps women who've been recently incarcerated get back to living their lives outside of prison. So yeah, and I wish I could remember the name of the organization, but I came in and did one of the book talks for those young ladies, and it was really, really inspiring.
That sounds very rewarding.
Yeah.
One of the things I find so admirable about Oklahoma Humanities is just the different levels they reach with different people. Like they've helped you publish works and research things that you're passionate about. And I've talked to people who they've worked more on the outreach side, and they've been able to spread a story, like a narrative that you normally wouldn't hear. And I just find that so interesting. Yeah. And you worked on the board too, and you enjoyed your time doing that?
I did. We got to read through all the grant applications and just to see the work that people were doing. So varied, so interesting. Some wonderful film projects that were funded through OH, some incredible scholarships, interesting talks. I think we always funded something for the museum in Oklahoma City, and they always brought in the most interesting things. So yeah, it was just wonderful to see all the activity that was going on in the state.
For sure. Do you have a specific memory tied to the organization that sticks out to you?
I really just remember the people. They're such lovely people, and they're so good at their jobs, and they care so much that it was just a delight to work with them. And I go back. Right now they're doing a once a year kind of intellectual Chautauqua of sorts. And I went last year and got to see all of those folks again. It's been almost 10 years since I was on the board, and everybody still remembers me, and they were all still just the most delightful people. So my memory is really about the people. They were just really dedicated, really wonderful people.
Truly. It's a community, very involved, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So you said you focused on military history, war history.
It's not military history. It's sort of cultural history of militarism.
I apologize.
Yeah.
I'm on the history side of things. I study history at OSU, so that's my brain's wired that way. But tell me more about your research.
So I'm really a broadcast historian. So most of what I've published has been sort of representations of the military or militarism in US popular culture. The book that I'm working on right now is a cultural history of the American Forces Network. Do you know what that is?
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah. So if you or your family were in the service and had served overseas, you might know this. It's a radio and television network that the military set up to convey command information to troops, but also to provide distraction and entertainment to them if they are stationed overseas. Right. So you can't get this network, you can't access this network from inside the United States, only if you're deployed overseas. But if you're deployed overseas, this is your primary channel for English language entertainment programming and music and information and news. And it's been around since 1942. So quite a long history, but almost no one has heard of it as with you.
It sounds like an integral part of, for lack of a better phrase, staying sane while on deployment.
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, the entertainment, the way that they justify it now when they have to justify their budget line is that's the thing that keeps people tuned in. But the function of the service is to deliver information. Right? So if there's a major weather event or if there's a protest that requires them to shut a base down, one of the ways they get the word out is through the television and the radio. And if people weren't watching or listening, then that wouldn't be successful, right? So you have to keep people engaged. And the way that you do that is with the entertainment.
Perfect. I was going to actually ask about, has there been a decline or any issues as technology has advanced and we have literal computers in our pockets these days?
Yeah, decline in viewership and listenership. Yeah, they are concerned about that, and they haven't really figured out what they're going to do long term at this point. I have interviewed it as part of. I don't know that the OHC grant helped me fund this research, but I've had other grants that have allowed me to go to the Riverside Broadcast Center and interview staff, and go overseas and interview staff. And it's a great project. And from those interviews, what I've gathered is that they're increasingly having trouble justifying themselves. Like, why do we need a radio station for the troops? Why do we need TV for the troops? They all have Netflix anyway. And the AFN just now, like 2 years ago, got the capability to have DVRs on base. So
that's
always a little behind the curve.
Yeah, but progress is progress.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the big technological shift really came with satellite, because they used to have stations wherever there were troops. So they would have to build and staff a radio and television station at each place. But with satellites, they can now kind of send that information from Riverside, California, anywhere in the world, and they just need to have a satellite download station. So there are many fewer stations, many fewer people working for AFN overseas now, and they don't do any original programming anymore per se. They do some
That was my next question.
yeah.
What do
So
they?
in the old days,
Yeah.
the fascinating part, in the old days, they used to, particularly when it was just radio, they used to create their own shows. And some of these shows they were better than shows you could get in the United States. So before television came along, radio was really one of the dominant, it was probably the dominant cultural media in American life. And it was not like we know radio. It wasn't a lot of recorded music with just filler. It was live programs that were variety shows, comedies, dramas, scripted dramas. You could get this all over the radio. So when it started in 1942, they were producing their own programs, and then also playing some retranscribed programs. But the programs that they were putting together were these variety programs with Hollywood stars. They could get the stars to donate their time and their labor for free for the war effort. So they would put on a variety show that would have like 9 superstars in it in a half an hour.
Is there like could you like celebrity name drop, I guess?
Yeah. I mean,
Involved.
name a celebrity from the 40s, and they were in Command Performance, which was the name of their kind of blockbuster program. Lana Turner. The premise of Command Performance was that the troops could command stars to appear to perform for them, and so they could say, I want to hear Lana Turner grill a steak. And they would bring Lana Turner on, and she would grill a steak.
That is so funny.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. They had a similar show called Jubilee, which was really geared more toward Black troops. They didn't have a lot of entertainment or support services for Black troops, but there were lots of Black troops overseas. So they did create this one program called Jubilee, and Jubilee had, let me think. Nat King Cole. It had Sarah Vaughan. It had, think of a mid-century jazz legend.
I was Motown, just early stuff.
Yeah.
That's so amazing. Wow. Shifting more towards like modern times. So you said they don't produce as much anymore, original content. So do they stream like mainstream networks, like news content and things like that?
Yeah, so there are about 11 stations now overseas that still have a TV studio, but they only use it really for occasional programming. So they'll occasionally do a talk program with the commanders. So they'll invite one of the commanders in and have a sit down and bring up issues that are relevant to the base, and that will be a show that's unique to that base, right? They'll also send camera crews out to do on-the-spot interviews with people. They'll focus on a unit and say, "Hey, what's your job? What do you do?" And do a little puff piece about it. But those they get played on AFN, but they also go into the Defense Video. It's called DVIDS, Defense Video Image something service. And that can then be used by anyone with access to that database. So news and local programmers in the States can also pull out of that queue and use the stories. So it's not that they're necessarily producing things for AFN the way that they used to. They do a little bit of that. But they used to do, a nightly newscast, for example. They don't have to do that anymore because with the satellite, they just pipe in. They actually have a whole channel now devoted to news, and you can get each of the major cable networks and all of the nightly newscasts from all of the major networks. So and then they just mix it up. They make a little rotation of those.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned the DVR thing, how they just the last few years introduced that capability. Whenever technology was shifting, like 80s, 90s, 2000s, and it was a really rapid growth, how did it keep up with that? And in what ways did it?
It really didn't. So the rest of the world, or at least the rest of the United States, we started getting cable in the late 70s, and it really took off in the early 90s, where we started to see some original cable programming and things like that. They didn't have multiple television channels on AFN until late 90s, right? So you could really only watch one channel.
Okay.
And that channel had to give a mixture of entertainment and information, and it had to feature whatever the top 25 broadcast programs were in some sort of rotation. And it didn't matter what network they were on. It would just be a kind of melange of the networks. So into the 1990s, there's one network.
That's
it's the best of the best. So it is a superior network to, say, any of the ones, ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox that we know today. But still, there wasn't any choice. They got, I think, 3 networks in the mid 90s, and then now they have 7 networks, or 7 channels. So they have one that's devoted to sort of women and children. They have one that's a movie channel, one that's a news channel, one that's actually 2 that are sports programs, sports channels, and a couple that are general purpose channels. So
okay. When you mentioned the women and children, I was going to ask about cartoons.
Yeah.
You see the rise in popularity in them. And I was just wondering, so they have the one channel that they're rotating to entertain mom, dad, and the children. Were there like specific, because you said they create some of these public or these shows, productions. Is there, my brain always goes to snafu when I think about war and things like that. And would that be included on?
Well, and quite frankly, the snafu cartoons were created under Frank Capra's leadership, but that division was next door to AFRS, American Forces Radio Service, right? So Tom Lewis, who was a radio executive and knew Frank Capra, asked Frank Capra, where should we locate ourselves? And he said, come on over to my studio, right? I have this studio to do this work. And so they were actually roommates for a while, the 2 services.
That's super odd.
Yeah.
Closely
but during World War II, there weren't any families overseas yet, right? We hadn't expanded our base structure in a permanent way at that point. That came after the war. And it's only after the war then that they start to think about, okay, we have to provide some things for children and for the women who are accompanying these service members. But they do actually, the local stations produce their own. I don't know, you're probably not old enough to remember this, but when I was a kid, like local television would do these, we had Cowboy Bob, right? And it was just some local guy who dressed up like a cowboy and did kind of a Mr. Rogers kind of thing, and showed cartoons and provided the intros and the outros for those, just mixed it up. So they did that kind of thing on bases all over the world, right? So you could go online, and if you look up Kanu Base, Kanu Air Base, Kagnew, that was it was Ethiopia at the time. It's now Eritrea. And it was an Air Force base that was doing some listening stuff during the Cold War. And they had a really great lineup of kids programs because they had a lot of children on base. So you can look that stuff up if you're interested.
Very interesting. I definitely will after this.
It's kind of fascinating.
It's very fascinating. Before this, I had no clue about, but yeah. I'm really fascinated about how they were kind of like roommates, like you said, with the creator of Snafu, because that's such an integral part of that time of history.
Yeah.
I wish this was like more well known. This is so fascinating.
Well, so that's why I'm writing the book.
Yes, exactly. What's going to be the title? I'll pick it up for sure.
The title is "We Bring You Home." That's the title. The subtitle, I keep changing it. That's why I have to look it up. Hang on a sec. Let me look it up. So "We Bring You Home" is their current logo of sorts. And so they'll show the AFN logo, and then "We Bring You Home" is sort of underneath it. So "We Bring You Home: The American Forces Network and U.S. Militarism Post-World War II" is the current working title.
Perfect. And when are you expecting publication?
Yeah, I don't have a publisher yet. I'm about halfway through writing it, a little bit less than halfway through writing it. So, I would say probably the end of next year. If I can get it done a little earlier, I'll actually hit the 80th anniversary, which is in summer next year. So, that's the goal, is to get it done for July 4th, 1942, or 1982, or whatever, 2022. So it would be 80 years from 1942. But I don't know if I'm going to have it done quite that early. We'll see.
There's so much that goes into book publication that I didn't even realize.
Yeah. Well, and this project is so huge
Yeah.
because it spans 75 to 80 years, and there are stations. It kind of ebbs and flows in terms of the size of the network, but it's all over the world. So at the height of the network, there's almost 400 stations. And, during the Cold War, it averaged between 100 and 150 stations. So, that's a lot of ground to cover in terms of the archives, in terms of, figuring out what kind of programs they're offering and that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's a bit of a monster.
Yes. And to bring back in the article that you wrote for the magazine, I read the title and it was about educating troops. You want to tell me more about your research?
So there's been some recent work done in critical military studies on Vietnam War as a leisure war, right? The notion of the leisure war. Meredith Lair's book, Armed with Abundance, is the key text there. And when she looks at Vietnam and the radio service and how it functioned in Vietnam, her argument is basically that it acted as a kind of insulation for people. That enabled them to do a job that they might otherwise have resented and or revolted against. And it was just one of many amenities, that bribes, if you will, that were given to the troops. The other thing, she notes, and people don't really think about this when they think about the Vietnam War, is that three out of every 4 soldiers who served in Vietnam served in the rear. So they were not humping the boonies on a weekly basis, and they were not, many of them, in danger at all most of the time they were there. So the narrative we have about the Vietnam War is often about the combat soldier, the foot soldier, but that was 1/4 of the people who served in Vietnam. So what happened to the other 3/4? Well, they're in the rear with the beer, as they say. The beer, the air conditioning, the mattresses from the US, the PX store where they could buy anything they wanted at a cheap rate. They had the most amazing stereo equipment and photography equipment and all of that. And AFVN, the American Forces Vietnam Network, was the radio station and TV station that served them. So her argument about that is that it was mostly about entertainment and mostly about kind of bribing the soldiers to be good soldiers, to kind of keep them in line. But that piece is actually looking at the other function of the service, which was as command information service. So I look at the news production of AFVN, and I look at some of the censorship controversies. AFVN was the one place in the Armed Forces network where oversight was not held by the broadcast center in the United States, but rather by MAC-OI, which is the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Office of Information. So every newscast that they produced, they had to have cleared by officers who worked at MAC-OI.
So with that, I have a question about especially the news, because, you know, on the home front, you have the counterculture and you have this complete, a very tense time in the US. How, or if they did they share that through the network?
So that's a good question. And they were not prohibited from showing that material. There was actually a directive from General Westmoreland early in 1967, which said that soldiers deserve the same free and unbiased information as everyone else, and I want to make sure that that happens, right? But what ended up happening on a day-to-day basis is that officers in MAC-OI were trained in public affairs, and public affairs job is to spin, right? To make bad things look good. And so they would actually enact censorship at the ground level. The other thing that happened is self-censorship, right? So I've interviewed a lot of the men who work for AFVN, and they have almost to a man said something on the order of, we didn't show a lot of that because it would depress the guys, right? So
Yeah.
they did cover it, but they tried to minimize the amount of coverage that they gave to it.
Which makes perfect sense if the intention is to boost morale and keep everyone interested in their job. I was just especially because it was such a, I don't want to say weird, but almost dark time in US history. The division was so stark.
Yeah, well, and a lot of those divisions eventually made their way into Vietnam anyway. As people, you know, the rotation schedule was a year. And so you had people who were involved in the anti-war movement being drafted in and bringing a lot of their politics with them, particularly Black soldiers who had been radicalized, or I don't say radicalized, who had their consciousness raised.
Yes.
When they came in, were a little bit more militant than the ordinary recruit. And they also, of course, caught a lot of flack just for being Black and political. So they would be targeted by officers, particularly officers who came from the South, whether they were particularly political or not.
Yes.
So, but certainly, you know, the Afro did not conform to the hair codes, right? And certain jewelry that Black soldiers might have wanted to wear to represent their affiliation with, say, the Black Power movement would get them in trouble very quickly.
I feel like that part of this history isn't discussed as much. At least I've never discussed it in my Vietnam class. We never really talked about it, but I find it very fascinating. But that makes sense that this negative attitude did eventually spread its way over.
Yeah, well, and you also have to remember that these folks were actually in Vietnam and they could see how the policies were not working. And so at a certain point, frustration just built. Like you could look around and see this is not working. This is in fact being counterproductive. And
that's where the network comes in.
Yeah, and you know, they're just going to, well, so the network becomes an object of ridicule among soldiers because it seems to be towing the line. But if you talk to the men who ran the network, they're like, nah, we weren't towing the line at all. We were, you know, indifferent. We were basically on our own out here, you know, they were in the boonies too, right? Wherever the troops were, they would just throw up a station. And some of them were in quite remote and dangerous areas. And no one really supervised those stations. If you were in Saigon, you were towing the line. because that's where the major infrastructure was and that's where all the officers were. But if you were assigned to one of these remote stations, nobody was really paying attention to you. You could do what you wanted. And they, for example, they were told not to play certain songs because they had references to drugs in them. And they would play the announcement, the public, what's it called? Public,
PSA?
the PSA, thank you. Yeah. They would play the little PS, the anti-drug PSA, and then right after it, they would play one of these band songs.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
So they did play. So this is around the same time they started shifting to more recorded music, you'd say?
It is actually, and FM radio is starts coming in. FM is the way we know radio, but actually it didn't become a thing really until the 1970s. That was for a variety of reasons that I won't go into here. The development of it was blocked. But you know, in the 1970s, transistor radios make that a more viable thing, and people start buying up stations on certain frequencies within the FM range rather than the AM range. And AM, it basically becomes alt radio. It's all the weird stuff that we can't get on mainstream radio. That's where that goes. But in Vietnam, they used it to kind of counter program. So that one of the knocks against AFVN, particularly in the early days, was that it was playing music from the 1950s, that it was like grandpa music. There was an article written that joked that there was a little old lady in pink tennis shoes who was censoring the music or picking the music, right? And so Guy Lombardo would still be heard on AFVN into the late 60s, right? So to provide a channel with some younger, hipper music on it, they started a set of FM stations. That network didn't reach quite as far as the AM network just because of the way the signals are propagated. But, you know, that was where by 1968 or so, where you could find the good music on AFVN.
That's so interesting. Wow. Much to think about.
Yeah.
I focus on the civil rights era.
Mm-hmm.
So music's a huge part of that. So it's interesting to hear how that connects with the troops in Nam. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a really great book called We Got to Get Out of This Place that I would recommend to you.
Let me jot that down.
I'll send you the author's names when I send the form in to you. So you can
perfect. Thank you. So you wrote this article for the magazine. Is this the only article you've written for the Oklahoma Humanities magazine, or have you?
I wrote another one on politics and pop culture around 2010 or so.
Interesting, very interesting.
Which is sort of a condensed version of my first book, which was about representations of the war on terrorism in U.S. television.
I was going to say that's right. America was it was right after the recession and all of that, 2010. I was still really young, so I don't remember much, but interesting. Yeah. And so I think maybe shift more back to Oklahoma Humanities and how it's affected your research outside of being a board member. So it's just like grants and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things about the OH grants is there are very few grants available for humanities research. There's not the infrastructure there that there is for the sciences. In part because the problems we solve are not perceived as practical problems or problems that are going to have an immediate impact. They're rather, we're thinking about how to tell the story of human being, right? And human interaction, and how to learn from mistakes that we've made and project into the future. That's what the humanities do best. So there aren't that many granting organizations. OH is one of the reliably available granting organizations, and they can only give a small amount, but many of the universities in the area will also match those grants with, say, a month's summer salary or something like that. So, you know, the OH grant itself is only about $500, and that'll cover, you know, maybe your airfare to whatever archive you want to go to, but that salary that comes along with it allows you to buy copies when you're there, you know, get permission to print imagery while you're there, buy a recorder to do oral history interviews. You know, it really provides that little extra bump that enables just historians in particular to do the work that they do, but humanities scholars in general to do the work that they do. So.
Very interesting. It's like almost a catalyst. It's like getting your project off the ground. Just interesting. Like a very.
That's certainly how I've used it.
I'm trying to think how. This is my second interview I've done for this project, so I hope I'm doing all right.
Are you guys interviewing David Pettyjohn?
Someone has already interviewed.
Someone has already. I was gonna say, tell him I said hi if you talk to him. He's such a lovely, lovely soul. He runs his own humanities organization now. So.
Okay, what's it called?
I think he's in Idaho, but.
Okay, interesting. Is there anything else you would like to add to the interview?
I don't know. I mean, one of the things that I will say we struggled with as a board all the time, and I was proud of the struggle, and I think they've done a really great job, is just to make sure that the programming gets to places that you wouldn't expect it to go. And it gets to populations who need it, who don't have that kind of access to human stories, right? Stories about their own lives and the lives of people that they care about. So, you know, every time we were assessing those grants, we made sure that we were taking into consideration, like, who's the target audience here? Is this going to reach a population that doesn't have these opportunities a lot? And that we put a priority on that. So, you know, I was really proud of that part of the work.
That's important.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah.
Especially the interview I've done before, she focused on Native American work. And I thought that was really important, that there was money and time allocated to that narrative and that story.
Yeah. And we've underwritten a couple of grants for films about tribes in the area, and contribute, I think, to the Cultural Center, the Choctaw Cultural Center, and just good work.
Supporting the community.
Around good work too, of course.
Yeah.
So it helps to have those institutions already doing the work, and then they come to us for help with that. So we don't have to get it off the ground, but we can help people who are already doing the work.
Exactly. Because then you get people who are passionate about the projects and who are going to tell a story the way it should be told.
Right. I mean, I would do a terrible job of telling any of those stories. So you don't really want me doing that work, but I'm happy to fund that work.
But you tell your story about the radio and the network beautifully and with passion.
Good.
Yes.
That's good to hear. I'll tell a publisher for me. No.
Yes. We all write in. If you are comfortable, you want to conclude things here? Sure. I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and I want to thank you again for giving your time to me and Oklahoma Humanities. And I look forward to reading your book when it comes out.
I'll let you know, and I'll send you that link for the book about music in Vietnam.
Yes.
We'll find it really interesting.
I think I will too.
It's a well-written book too. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Stacy, and I will hear from you soon.